everybody, it's Professor Lynn Mandziuk, and today we're going to talk about digital painting in Photoshop. Brushes, custom brushes, layers, and color burn. The real workflow. So today, again, we're going to talk about digital painting. If your Photoshop painting looks like it's made of wet plastic and sadness, good news. It's not you. It's your brush settings and your layers. Today I'm going to show you the actual digital painting workflow. The 4 brushes you need, how to make your own brushes, how to download brush packs, and how to use layer modes and brush modes, especially normal and color burn without nuking your image. So let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, I want to start with a canvas that can actually handle painterly texture. So I will go in New File, and I want to make sure I'm at 300 pixels per inch. I'm doing 4,000 on the long end, and we can just leave that as default there. 300 DPI, and I want RGB, and we are going to do Adobe RGB color profile. If your computer starts making airplane noises, then you've probably bit off a little more than you can chew. You can drop it to maybe 2,500 to 3,000 pixels. And really the point is, don't paint tiny and then blow it up and wonder why your strokes look crunchy or pixelated. We want to have the correct resolution, so you want to make sure you're sizing appropriately. I will click create, and if I go into my brush tool and go under my brush settings, you are your starter pack comes with a certain set of brushes, shape dynamics and things like that. We have the Kyles. I believe these come with Photoshop now. Special effects brushes, things like that. You can actually go onto different sites and look up Adobe brushes for free. And you can find on Adobe these different brush packs that you can get for different textures. And you would just download, let's see, which one do I want to download? We will download, ooh, I love rollers and brayers. And much like you would download a font, you can download these brushes. And again, they are covered. They should be covered with your software. They will load in the Creative Cloud. You can go in and look at each one of them. I love them all. I'm going to add. And that should add them all. There are also sites like True Grit is great. True Grit Supply. I actually met them at the Icon conference, and they do great work, but all of these are digital brushes, and they make them to look traditional, which is, again, something that is very important when we are doing design. So you can get all of these different textures. Some of them are pen and ink. Some of them are Rizzo style, comic book style. You do have to pay for these. However, they have all of these different great sets that you can get, and they are available for Photoshop, Procreate, Affinity, Clip Studio Paint. Obviously, we're using Photoshop, so we want to grab the Photoshop one. If you love using Procreate, you can use that too. I will say you can use Procreate and bring it into Photoshop. That's actually what I used to do, but I work so much with layer styles in Photoshop, and I was bringing my images from my tablet into Photoshop. that when I use Procreate, I can't bring it back and forth from my iPad version to the Photoshop version. You lose a lot of the layer styles that you apply. So I just started using Photoshop for the tablet. More recently, I just sync my tablet if I'm working at home to my desktop and use it as a tablet on my iPad and paint like as if it were a Cintiq or something like that. I would actually do that for this demo, but the problem is I can't record when I'm using the iPad because I lose the connection on my iPad because I have an older iPad. I'm trying to update it right now as we speak, so maybe it'll be fixed by the next demo I do. However, those are some different options. So I should be able to go in here now, and I might have to close out of Photoshop and reopen it. Again, I'm just doing this size, 300 dpi, and I should be able to go in here and have my different brushes. I don't know if they actually showed up, but they should. I might have to do something else in the cloud for them, but I won't troubleshoot that right now. But typically they would be in here. So the other important thing is we see this nav bar here. If I click on this folder on the top, we'll see that the brush settings show up. So what that does is I'm going to start a new layer, and I have these shape dynamics, so I can actually go in here and edit my brushes. I can edit the spacing of them. For today's demo, I'm just using my mouse, but you probably won't be able to tell a difference anyways because you wouldn't be able to see me using the tablet anyways. But if you are using a tablet with an Apple pen or pencil or a smart pencil, you get more realistic pressure as you would if you're actually using paint or a real pencil. So the tablet is helpful, especially for those of you who are illustrators or are interested in doing illustration. So we have these different dynamics, and so you can click through and you can see scattering. That wasn't clicked on before, but it can actually change the texture and tone of the brush, dual brush, brush pose. This is the angle of the brush, so I can actually change what angle it's coming at. I can change the roundness. I can flip it. I can flip it vertically or horizontally, and I can change the size here. I can also change anything else. I can also save this as a new brush. So if you edit one of these brushes and you're like, ooh, I really like that, save it. And you can rename it something new, like Lynn's Edited Brush Demo. So then I can go in on my new layer and I can use this, right? And I can change the size up here if I want. Again, you can play around with these different textures and see what you like, what you want to use. If we go up here, you'll notice some other dynamics, and what we have up here are opacity, so I can paint transparently, flow, so this is how much paint, so you can see if I turn down the flow, it makes it a little bit more watered down. Smoothing, this smooths out the flow, but you can also see that the actual brush is slowing down when I have that up. And so if you ever have your brush slowing down your computer, it's probably because it's slowing down your memory, so you want to be wary of that. So these are all really great things. You know, you can go in with the blur tool after you paint if you want to blur things out more. I can change the hardness on this, and you can see it pops up here because it acts as a brush too. And I can actually go in and blur these things. You can see it's getting blurry. Maybe I want to fade out some things. I can also do smudging. So I'll make this bigger so you can see. I can smudge these areas and they kind of drag things around. I can sharpen areas. Another tool that works here is the eraser tool. So I can actually go in and erase things. So that's another option. So to make a new brush, you can just go to new brush preset. It'll open your new brush, and again, you can edit it the way you want. And oops, I need a layer. I didn't have a layer on. So let's say I want to edit this and make it my own. I can flip it. I can change color dynamics. So what does this do? This means that the saturation changes. So what does that mean? We'll do it with a color, and you can see that maybe the brightness changes as you go around. So it's kind of emulating what paintbrushes would do if you're mixing paint. So it's creating like a rainbow effect, which is kind of interesting. You can do wet edges too. So this gives like a more watercolor effect. And so on and so forth. So that's something else with the brush dynamics, and you could save that. Something else I want to show you is, I'm going to grab one of these brushes. So I want to show you these modes up here. So we know the blend layer modes here, right? So these are also similar to blend layer modes. And what's happening here? We have other options here. Well, what that is another way to let me go back to one. Oops. Brush. I'm gonna go here and grab this brush. That looks like a nice one. So what happens here is I can paint with this brush, right? And I turned on all these things. I actually don't want any of these things. I just want a straight up red paintbrush. It's a little bit transparent. So again, I'll change the opacity up here. And let's say I have this layer and I'm like, I like this, but maybe I want to add something below it. Well, what I can do is I can click behind here and I can change this color. Let's change it to blue. And now I can paint behind what I already did. So you can see where it's transparent, it's showing through more, but the solid in the foreground is staying red in the foreground because I'm only painting under it, which is really nice. I can do the same thing with clear. I can delete that way, so instead of using a eraser, and I can be using opacity here to do this, so instead of having to create a new layer and paint over it as one used to do in Photoshop, I can just go over these and kind of clear it out with these different modes. Again, you can experiment with what these do. Some of them work in the blend layer style way, where it's just doing a screen overlay effect or a divide. I can do divide, and what this would look like is it creates the opposite, right, of whatever that color is. Saturation, I can change it to like a neon. Let's see what happens when I do that. So you can see that's really changing things as well. Okay, so that is how that properties menu works. You can go through this and experiment with that as well. Again, you can also just do another layer and paint over as well, or paint under, but these are all different things you can do. So we have different brushes. Again, I would be wary with this brush, which is the airbrush because it is the original brush in Photoshop, and it's the one that everyone starts using, and so they overuse it. And everyone knows what brush that is. Everyone's like, oh, cool, airbrush effect. But it's overused, and we all know what it is. So the key is to use tools that we don't know exactly what the brush is. We want to trick the user. We don't want to show our recipes. We want to be sneaky about our recipes. You want typically like some sort of pen tool brush or pencil sketching brush, which would look something like this. And you can tell because it's thin on the end and thicker in the middle, so that usually designates it as some sort of line work tool. You want some sort of texture brush. So texture brushes are always good. And you want a detail brush. So maybe like some sort of round tip brush or a filbert style brush. Those are helpful as well. Okay, so I want to show you another way to make a new brush, and what you'll do is you can go ahead, and I am using this print that I made. It was a charcoal drawing that I digitized and then screen printed and layered. But I can go ahead, and I like this for an example because it has a lot of this detail that when you go close up to it, it becomes abstracted. So if I select that area and I go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, it'll actually sample that area. You can see it here, and I can label it McRib because that's what I named this piece. Click OK. And now I can go back to this piece and sample that, right? So you can see it's sampling it. It looks blocky, but if I go in here and I change the spacing, I can actually get that exact rib shape, right? Let's see what happens when I do 100%. So I could make a brush out of that, right? Let's say I just wanted to grab the blue area. I could go to my channels and I can turn off, actually I want the red channel. So I can actually go Command, Channel Select, and then I would go to Inverse, and I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to fill that. I'm going to turn off my background so you can see it. And you can see I grabbed that whole rib area now. So now I'm going to go in and get my magic wand tool and select this outer area. Nope. Sorry, I got a new magic mouse, and my old magic mouse was dying apparently, so it was really slow and dragging, and now this one's like super speedy. So if I go to tolerance, I'm going to check maybe like 5, and it's still grabbing a lot of this. Oops. I think that'll be fine actually. If I wanted to, I could go in and erase, you know, some of this area here, but I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to select all, so Command A, and again go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, McRib 2. And then I can go back here to my main image, and I can actually make that rib texture, which if I turned it into a brush, it's so abstracted, it actually looks quite interesting. And again, I can go into scattering, so I could jitter it so it offsets the image so it's not just one straight line. I could go in with texture and add a texture. I could do, I'm going to do wet edges. So this kind of makes it more like a blendy brush. Let's see. No, I do want let's see what happens with this. So you can go in and make your own design, right? But if I go back to the main area, you know, I could just make it so you could see the rib on its own, or not. So that's how you would make a brush like that. Another thing that you want to do when you are painting is think about layer stacking. So what that would look like is if I had a landscape, let's say I was doing, and I'm just going to do a quick run through of an imaginary landscape in my mind. I'm going to label this BG, even though there's a background down here, but for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to do it this way. And then I could just quick fill in the background to whatever I want it to be, and I would do the ground as well. And again, this would be similar to creating some blocked in area if you were creating an initial illustration. These are a little bit saturated for me, so this is the cool thing about Photoshop. I can go in and I can add an adjustment layer, and I can go to hue saturation, okay, and I can start maybe playing around with these. Maybe it's too saturated. I like the hue, but maybe I want it to be a little bit more saturated like this. I could even go in and just lighten up this sky area, and now I have a good starting point. So what I can do now is above that hue saturation, I can create a new layer, and I can go in probably with some type of brush that's like more like a pencil or pen, because that's how I work. And I can go in and start sketching in something, and I'm going to go with like a traditional painter style and like a ochre. And actually you could start with a ground. For those of you who traditionally paint, I could start with a background that's like more of this red. Actually, I will start like that because I want to demonstrate how you can make this look more like a landscape painting. And I can go in with, we'll start with the ground, and I'm gonna go in and just sketch this out. So maybe I have this scene, and the orange is reminding me of red rocks and like the desert, so I'm gonna do like this mesa scene, like Moab or something like that. And I can just quickly sketch it in, and maybe, you know, maybe I have like a foreground here and something like that. And I'm gonna go in with like a chunky charcoal brush. Now, maybe one of these. And make it bigger, and I can just go in. Actually, I'm gonna make it even bigger than this. I would probably, first of all, I'm using a mouse right now. You can hear me clicking. Typically, I would be using my tablet, but again, for this demo today, my tablet was not letting me connect, so I'm just using a mouse. I would typically do this part quick as I am, but I would probably be maybe a little bit more accurate. And the way I work, much like traditional painting, I just get those darkest values in as fast as I can, because I think sometimes we can be hesitant to get in darker values, and then it's hard to see where the other values need to go. So I would do something like this, and then that's my foreground. So I would make another layer under this, and I already messed up because I forgot to make a new layer with my line drawing, but that's okay, we can edit that. as we go along. And then as we recede, I'm going to make it more warm. So this, I'm going to go in with the middle value and, oops, and make sure you're selecting the right layers. So I want to make sure it's a layer underneath. And I'll just go in and I block in this area too. And again, this is way more messy than I normally would, but I don't want to make this a long, super long demo. Maybe I'll add a longer one at some point for everyone to watch, but for the sake of learning, I don't think that's necessary. So now I have my middle values in there, and I can color these in so then, you know, the foreground has some of that background warmth. And from here, I'm going to try to refine some of this area. And now we're getting into some of the shadowy aspects. So I want to make sure, you know, in landscape painting, and again, you know, for this paint demo, like you can use a landscape. For some of you may be illustrators, you can do a straight up landscape. You can use a portrait. Maybe you want to try painting a portrait of a friend, or if you have a straight up illustration, that's fine too. The big thing is I want you to experiment using these different brushes. I'm imagining that the light source is coming from here, from this way, from right. And so we would have some sort of shadow here and probably some sort of rim lighting, which is why I left some of that light over there. But the other option is you can do a photo edit using these brushes too, okay? And I just go in and kind of refine all these things. As we move in the distance, you know, the shadows kind of fade as well into that middle value. I would maybe add some more here, maybe a core shadow, and this would definitely be darker. And then, you know, imagining some of these areas. Again, you know, this is just from my imagination, but I've done a lot of landscape painting. So I'm understanding some of these tenets of painting. Again, same thing here. We're getting some more texture and stuff like that. I could even go in with the polygonal, since we're working with rocks. There's probably harder edges and texture on those cliffs, on some of those cliff angles and things, and I can actually go in and maybe separate these more with a solid shape or value. I can do the same thing here. Oops. Again, squirrely mouse. Sorry everyone. And the same thing here. And again, I'm just imagining that light is coming from that direction, so it would be something like this. But now you can see we're getting kind of close in value to the foreground, which I don't want. So I'm going to actually take these and use the blend layer style. So I could darken them up, or I can make them multiply, and then I can go into fill, and then I could even go in and do something like this. This is another option. I can go in and do a gradient, and yeah, I want something more like this. Oops. Maybe something more like that. Change it even to something like that. And then have that multiplying effect. I actually want to reverse it the other way. So then it fades out a little bit too. I can go back in and blur to soften that edge, right? Because it's a little bit too hard, even if it's rock. It's a little bit too much. And I can go in and start getting some of this texture too. And I'm just imagining the light and the shadow here and what that would look like. Again, this is under this foreground layer, but maybe I want to make it something like that, a little bit more solid. And I could go in here. And this is typical of how I work. So I use a lot of like solid fills. I do like silhouetted shapes like this. And then I try to go back in with a lighter value. Maybe like something like this. To give some hints and highlights here and here. Maybe here. Maybe this comes around. And I'm still using this big blocking brush. And that's just kind of how I work with landscapes. If I was painting humans or animals or characters, I would probably start using more refined brushes. But for this, I would typically do something like this. And there would be some light creeping through here, I think, through this window. Or I'm going to pretend there would be. And you can see I can bring that through. And then now I can go back to this foreground layer and I'm going to make it a little bit more purple. A little bit darker. Why? Well, when we look at painting from life, typically the light source is warm, the sun. And what that means is in the foreground we'll have more warmth. In the shadows we'll have more cool colors, cool tones. And what actually happens too is that the warm colors come to the foreground more and the cool colors recede. So it gives us more of a sense of depth. And again, I can use, you know, multiply, color burn, darker color. I could do something like that. And sometimes I do this, sometimes I do both. I'll do like a color layer and then also like an overlay, because then I get that texture. And then I can go into blur again. And then I just blur it as much as I can, the color, because then I get more depth, I think. And I can go in and refine this more and more. I'm not going to, but I am going to do one more thing, which is I'm going to start painting in the background. So I want to use, and this is a very landscape painter thing to do. I'm going to go back to my brushes. I'm going to try this brush. I have some oil brushes in my set. I'm using my desktop, which I haven't used in a while, so I haven't updated it with everything. yet, but again, you can just download these different sets, and I can go in and let's see, brushes. I'll do. Actually, I'm going to use this new McRib. Let's see what I can do with McRib, okay? So we'll go to that spacing, and maybe we'll change that angle a little. And I'd just go in and I'd start blocking in maybe some of the sky. And, you know, when we're using these grounds and landscape painting, oftentimes you do, especially in the desert, you might see some of that orange in the sky still. So I do want to leave it kind of transparent in parts. But realistically, I would be doing something like this. I would probably be a little bit more solid here. And the more I paint with this brush, the more I'm like, I could probably adjust it a little bit more. But it is giving it an interesting texture, right? So I can add in some blue over here. Even though maybe the light's indicating that it's like earlier day. So maybe I would go back in and add some orange over here just to make it look like it's either sunset or sunrise, because the shadows are pretty low, right? And then I would go in. Oops, that's a little too dark. But maybe over here would get that dark. No, I think that's still too dark. This is what I do when I paint. I don't know if anyone else is like this. You can hear me talking to myself. But you can see I'm leaving some of that orange coming through, and that gives it like more of a traditional painterly feel, because that's typically how we paint these landscapes, building up over the orange ground. And it also makes the painting warmer. It gives it a feeling like the background and the foreground are more solidified. So I could even, something that would help with the foreground is I could even go in and do another layer and maybe add in some of that blue here. And maybe more of the darker blue would help a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to leave it like this solid, but adding some reflective shadow in there. And then I can go in and use again these blend layer styles and hopefully find one that's pretty cool, but it's too intense. So I would maybe bring it down. Something like that. And this is really quick, really rough, but I have a solid landscape that I started using 5 brushes. I think that's what I asked for in the exercise. So play around with these. Again, make sure you're layering. I know I'm always talking about layer hygiene, file hygiene. When I paint, it's completely different because it's just a free-for-all for me. So I'm just like pumping out layers. I do go back and label them. So now that I'm taking a break, I would save this and I would label it as, you know, the different areas. But when I'm painting, I don't want to be interrupted from that moment. I think a lot differently when I'm creating illustrations than when I do with design. Design is very analytical for me. It's orderly. It's meant to be orderly. Illustration is meant to be expressive. It's meant to flow, so I don't want to interrupt my flow. So I work that way, but I still label it, but when I'm not painting. So I can just open this file later and I know where everything is. So the last thing I do on all my paintings is I do go into Adobe Stock, or I actually have my own library of paper textures and textures I've taken. But if this were a watercolor, I could find watercolor texture, would probably pick something like this. But because I was painting with a background orange ground, I'm actually going to use canvas texture. And more specifically, I'm going to pick something that I would actually use. And what does that mean? I hate canvas texture when I'm painting in acrylic or oil. I much prefer actually like a gesso or a board texture. Oops, I did gesser, not gesso. And what pops up now is we get more of these textures, and so I can go through and I can find one that's maybe appropriate. And I want something textural, but maybe kind of like that one. Let's see what else we have here. The thing is, you know, with these textures, typically I would probably make my own texture. I mean, maybe even per painting. Or for landscapes, I would have one specifically for like landscapes. Maybe one for, you know, portraits, so on and so forth. But I want to find something. Oh, I kind of like this one. I think I'm going to use this one. I'm going to download it. Let's see here, and then I can go find it in my Finder, right click, open with Photoshop, and I can select all, copy, go back to my painting, and I can just paste this in here. And you know, it's not the same size, but with this, I'm not actually using it. Oops. I actually just used the wrong one. So again, select all, copy, paste. And we can see it's resizing like crazy here. So I can actually shift to change the aspect ratio on here, because the thing is, I'm using this as a blend layer. So I can go through my channels here. And I can see which one is going to work the best. And it looks like different areas work better for different parts of this painting. I'm actually going to go back and stretch this out. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to do this, and I'm actually going to play around with different orientations. I can play around with different blend layers on this one. Maybe for this one, I'll do something more like this, and then take down the opacity. I can use masks. I can do layers of paint over it, but you can see now it's giving it a different type of texture, and I'm actually going to go in and do levels on these. And I know I preach about non-destructive layers, but in this scenario, I'm doing it because it's serving as a texture layer. And then this one, I can do the same thing. Sometimes with these, you can just do a straight up image adjustment gradient map. Because I'm using colors, it'll give a little bit more richness to this. So again, I can add in that ground maybe. Maybe I'll make this like yellowy and giving it a more almost like rustic vibe. And there's no recipe for this. It kind of just depends on the colors you're using, playing around with feeling and thought. So you can see now I'm getting a whole different look and mood. And then I can do levels on this and even change it up. It's almost giving it like a crackle effect, right? So again, you know, and if I have it on full opacity, you can see more texture. I can bring it down. I can mask out certain areas. But this is just making it look less digital, right? So if we take this off and compare it, and this one I'm actually going to take down too. So now I'm getting more of a paint vibe. You know, if I don't like where some of these gesto marks are, I can use content fill or delete them out and move them around accordingly. But that gives you an idea of what that looks like.